If you have any premonition, like you feel something's going to happen, then it happens, where did that come from? If even one premonition for even one person on the entire planet Earth is correct, then the entire classical understanding of physics is incorrect, because you're transferring information across time and space. So if anyone in your audience, anyone anywhere has ever felt something and it turned out to be true, or remote viewed or perceived something, if even one remote viewing experience is correct, then it violates the entire paradigm of classical mainstream physics.
Welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness. It's Luciano here speaking as your host as usual. Before we get started, as per usual, I do want to ask the listener to rate us when you can, and wherever you listen to your podcast, we're on every major platform. Share with your family and friends, and then visit our website. You can see on our website the library of content, the library of knowledge that we're amassing with our guests all around the world. And if you're so inclined, regular listeners know, of course, that we're a not-for-profit and also a charity. And if you're so inclined, you can donate. You'll find it very easily on the website. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We keep having interesting people, and this is one of our large focuses, to have interesting people to come on the program and to have discussions of exploration. Today, it's not going to be any different. So here we go. We're speaking to Courtney Brown in Atlanta, right? Courtney, you're right now in Atlanta?
That's exactly right. I'm in Atlanta.
Okay, here we go. So a little bit about you, Courtney, for the listener. So
okay.
Hang tight. Courtney Brown is a mathematician and social scientist who teaches in the Department of Political Science at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Independent of his work at the university, he is also a leading scholar on the subject of remote viewing. And many of our regular listeners kind of already have been exposed to that here on the podcast. So as a subject of remote viewing, as it is done using procedures that were developed by the US military, or procedures that are derivative of those methodologies. Courtney received his PhD from Washington University in St. Louis in '82 in political science, with an emphasis on mathematical modeling. He began his career as a college calculus instructor in Africa before moving on to teach nonlinear differential and difference equation modeling. Don't know what that is. Maybe we'll talk about that too. In the social sciences at the University of California in Los Angeles, Emory University, and University of Michigan. He's published 5 peer-reviewed books and numerous articles on applied nonlinear mathematical modeling in social sciences. He is also the director and founder of the Farsight Institute, farsight.org, which is a non-for-profit research and educational organization dedicated to the study of the phenomenon of non-local consciousness known as remote viewing. He has published peer-reviewed research on this subject in premier scientific outlets, has spoken internationally at a host of prestigious venues, including various universities, and at respected gatherings of physicists. His recently published book on the subject, Remote Viewing, The Science and Theory of Non-Physical Perception, is the only book of its kind where the science of remote viewing is developed with respect to highly structured data collection methodologies of the kind utilized by the US military. In this book, he analyzes data and develops a new theory that explains the remote theory phenomenon as a consequence of superposition formation on the quantum level. Maybe we'll try and discover this as well with Courtney. He's an avid filmmaker, photographer, and digital artist. This one thing I didn't know. He's also produced a number of documentaries involving the subjects of remote viewing and extraterrestrial life. And he's written 2 best-selling books on both these subjects. And this is what I didn't know, that he has been active in performance and theater and acted in lead roles in a number of television series and films in the US and Africa, both of which were full-season television shows in Swahili. Welcome to the program, Courtney.
Luciano, it's good to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No, it's my pleasure. We spoke several months ago, and we've kept in touch, and we've both been, I guess, committed to finally recording. So we're here. For the listener, I came across your name and your work through one of our other podcast guests from like 2 years ago. His name is Mark Gober. And he didn't mention you to me, but he mentioned you in an interview that he gave to someone else. I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Let's see what Courtney's about." and so we went to your website, and we decided, no, we're going to talk to him. And I failed to mention your second website. We'll put it in the show notes. Your media website, which is farsightprime.com. You were an actor. What's up with that? What happened there? How did that?
Well, when I was in college, that was one of the things I did to help pay my bills. So
Wow.
I did some soaps and lead in a movie, and then I did a bunch of commercials. And then when I was in Africa, I did some TV series where I was the lead. I was playing Dr. Livingston in a show called Susie Nachuma. That was a year-long show. And then in another one, I was Sir John Kirk on another show called Sultan Bargash. And they played pretty heavily in Africa, Swahili-speaking Africa, of course.
Wow.
But anyway, I haven't done that type of theater since then.
How's your Swahili?
I'm fluent in Swahili. I go back and forth between U.S. and Africa a lot.
Yeah, so we did talk about that. You said Africa is a very calming place.
Yeah, it's a very calming place that doesn't have the racial divisions that you have in the United States. Background noise and an emotional sense in the U.S. You don't really sort of know they're there until they're gone. And then when you go to Africa, all that racial tension is not existing because it just is, they don't have the same history as we do. And so it's just calming in that sense.
I had the same sense when we spoke to Julie Church. She's also on this podcast. She's from Nairobi, Kenya, of English extraction, and she more or less explained it the same way, but had me very curious about how life is lived in Kenya. Anyway, so I don't want to go off topic.
Yeah. No, it's perfectly okay. We're going to be expanding our activities in Africa, and Kenya is my base also.
Huh. So you say you go back and forth to Africa. This is, I guess, is in the off season because during the school year you're a full-time prof or tenured prof. Is that right?
Yeah, but I can go. We have a long winter break and then we have a long summer break, and I can go even for short times in the middle, fall break, spring break, things like that. So I manage to go back and forth quite often.
Courtney, we've had, let's go right into it. So,
okay.
As you know, we've had Russell Targ here. That's how we introduced remote viewing, I guess, for the first time to our listeners. And that was a fascinating conversation. He co-founded the SRI Institute and worked with the CIA. And so, not without giving too much detail, because our listeners can go, if they haven't listened, they can listen to that episode, where they worked with the CIA to train their personnel, to research and train personnel in psychic abilities through what they call remote viewing. And then we talked about it again with a fellow recently. His name is Chief Scientist at IONS, Dean Radin, who worked in that same institute for about a year. And he said something also very interesting. He said it was a shame all the science that was being developed around remote viewing and only around military type activities and intelligence. But there's so much science that's wasted because that was a narrow focus. You are a pioneer of what I've been learning, a pioneer in taking remote viewing and expanding the discipline, if I can use that word. So before we get into that, if I can ask you to define to the listener what remote viewing is in all of your experience.
Remote viewing is mental. So in the old days, they used to call it psychic perception, and then they tried to use the word psi as PSI, so to get away from the word psychic because it had so much baggage with it. But it's a mental process, and we have developed theories about how and why it works. And there's different people that talk about their own reasons. So I'm only going to be talking about the theories that we have developed and how we use it and so on. So, but it's a mental process, and it's basically oriented around focusing your perception on images, sounds, all the five senses that come through very vaguely and foggy, fuzzy, semi-transparent, things like that. So a remote viewing image is an image, but it's transparent-ish, and you have to learn to focus on that type of a thing. For example, if you look at something with your eyes, it's very bright. The image is coming in through the eyes, going through the ocular nerve stuff, and then being, in a sense, projected onto the screen of the brain, a layer of cells on the brain that actually recognizes what it is that you're looking at. If you remember something and put that in your memory, like right now, you'll see it. It's another image, like picture of a pen here, like this pen, but you put it, the memory of the pen in you bring it up in your memory and you'll see it, but it's dimmer. You can see right through it and see the ocular image, which is brighter. And then remote viewing is like that. It's dimmer, foggy or fuzzy, and remote viewers become good at focusing on those images when they're doing remote viewing. So they call it sort of in the mind's eye type of thing. And we at the Institute have our own procedures that we have developed. They were derivative of the procedures that were used and developed by the United States military. We didn't feel that the military procedures went far enough, that they weren't doing what we wanted them to do. They didn't have the level of structure that we wanted. And so we had developed our own enhancements of those procedures, which are quite large. And then we use those procedures with our own work. And we use remote viewing for exploration as well as scientific experiments. Scientific experiments are oriented around figuring out how and why the remote viewing process works. And then exploration is when we actually go and use it to find out things about things. So the military used it for espionage purposes, and they did not focus too much on the how it works as much as they focused on how to make it work better. And then we did both of those things. We now understand from our perspective exactly why and how it works. And we also understand that we can use it for things. And so we do use it for things. So at Farsight, that's Farsight, like seeing far. At Farsight, we do lots of public projects, and we're the only major group or even minor group that has public projects in remote viewing done under clean scientific conditions where the remote viewers are totally blind to the target. They do not have any contact with the tasker before they do the target. They're given basically an email or text or that says there's a target, do it, and they do their work. They start out totally solo. They also don't have any communication about the subject. They know nothing about the topic, nothing about the subject. They just know there's a target, and they do their work solo, blind, and everything. And they eventually end up in our studio and doing the finishing up, usually on what we call a light board, which is a huge piece of ocular glass where they're drawing, so it looks like they're drawing on air. It's very cool, sort of nice way to present remote viewing information. And they present that while it's being recorded live, and no one's in the room while they're recording that. So they're doing it totally solo. And that's how we do our stuff. And we have a ton of public projects, ton of projects, many of which are available for free, but all of which are available on our streaming service, farsightprime.com.
Mm-hmm.
And that's equivalent in quality to Hulu, Netflix, Disney, Paramount Plus, whatever.
I've seen some of the material there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of information on there that's available for free, including the removing instruction course and stuff like that. You just need to put in your email registration only. Like any place else that you get anything like Amazon, you have to have an email account. So, uh, other than that, for people who watch our premium projects, which is all of our explorations, which is a zillion of them, it's a subscription service. But there's a ton of stuff to get started for free, including a lot of projects that we did on all types of interesting topics, from national type of stuff to space stuff.
Okay, well, I want to go further. We're going to go deeper here. Before we do so, I'm not sure if I shared this with you, but with Russell Targ, off camera, we tried a couple of sessions of remote viewing, and it's surprised. I was just open-minded. Never done anything like that. 5 years ago, I would have never even tried because I would have poo-pooed it. But they kind of worked. And he congratulated me on it too. He was actually surprised that it would work so fast. I think it was just an open mind. I tried it one more time afterwards, just on my own. And I shared those details in the episode with Suzanne Giesman, who is a U.S. naval commander and is now a medium. I shared the details with her. But the reason why I say that is because that third time that I tried, I stilled my mind, and I experienced images just like the way you described, that it came foggy, and they were almost transparent. It was just like something popped up. Oh, actually, three things popped up, and they went away just as quickly, but they imprinted very, very well. But it was very foggy, and it felt like it felt like when you recall a memory. And that shocked me. And one of the three things that I saw, actually two, but one of them in particular came true. And I evidenced it for myself by writing it out before I shared it. So you mentioned military, for military purposes. I know this is kind of a long question, long preamble, but just stick with me.
It's okay.
So what I learned with remote viewing is that the U.S. military back in the early 70s figured out or found out that the Russians were doing it. The Russian military was already doing it in the 60s. So their stance was always a reactive one. This is my interpretation. It was always a reactive one. How can we do this so that we can protect against? And you said they've always been concerned about how to make it better, while your concern is why it works. So here's my question to you. Why does it work?
It's pretty straightforward once you sort of drop the idea that mainstream physics has a grasp on things. The big problem with physicists is that they take what you see in physical reality as normal, as the end of the story. And with classical mechanics, Newtonian stuff, that was the basis of everything. Relativistic physics started to bend it a little bit, so that they started to incorporate a theory of gravity, and special relativity started to understand that time can be bent and things like that. But they still basically accepted that what is physical is like this mouth is just physical. But they never really wrapped their heads around the reality that quantum mechanics didn't match the macro world stuff. And there was one physicist named Hugh Everett who got his PhD under John Wheeler in 1957 at Princeton. And he came up with another theory to interpret quantum mechanics that was generalizable to the macro world. And basically, he said that there are other worlds, that the physical stuff that people see isn't the only thing that exists. And what happens with quantum mechanics is that you don't have the so-called Copenhagen interpretation of the collapse of the wave function, so that you have only one physical reality, so that the wave function sort of characterizes everything that happens on the quantum level as basically just energy. waves, frequencies. And then they assumed that all of that will condense and produce one thing. But they had experiments that indicated that that wasn't working. The famous experiment is the two-slit experiment, which clearly indicates that when things manifest themselves from the quantum world to become physical reality as we see it, they get interfered with before they do it. And then the real question is, well, what are they being interfered with if there's only one particle? And so Hugh Everett was the one who figured out that they were being interfered with many infinite versions of themselves. And that when that one particle manifests, it doesn't mean the other particles don't exist. It just meant that that one particle came into alignment with the physical reality that we're sort of occupying. And so mainstream physics, which was sort of locked into the idea that there can be only one physical reality, it was very hard for them to bend their heads around the idea. It was very hard for them to bend their heads around the idea that there could be multiple realities that they don't see.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hugh Everett was the one who originally started that. He was widely ridiculed. He got so disgusted at the whole thing, he went out of academia. He left physics and went into the Defense Department, where he was still a physicist, but he worked on the nuclear stuff in the Pentagon. And he was one of the great designers of MAD, which is mutually assured destruction, because at the time, there were civilian and military leaders arguing for a first strike attack on Soviet Union and China. And Hugh Everett was the one who said, you can't do that, or you're crazy. That'll kill everybody. No one's going to survive that. And so he was the one who helped design the idea of let them build their missiles and aim them at us, and we'll build our missiles and aim them at them, and nobody will fire, because if anyone fires, everyone will be destroyed. Mutually assured destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And we are today alive and well because of that. So but Hugh Everett, before he died, he was brought in to speak at a number of universities, including the University of Texas at Austin, where his theories were finally given the light of day. And I understand about 25% of mainstream physicists have now bought onto it and have accepted that that is what's actually going on. And we're waiting for the other 80% to retire and die off. That's basically what happens. So you can sort of say, well, what is then remote viewing? That means we're multidimensional beings ourselves, and we're seeing only one version of ourselves. That also means, like a radio or television, you can have, like when you look at television or the Zoom recording, if you look at television, it looks really solid, and it's only a matter of a few years before televisions become holograms, so that you'll see the movies like in 3D in front of you. It'll look solid and it'll look real, but it's not. It's just frequencies. So our physical reality is really just a bunch of frequencies. There's nothing real about real stuff. There's no matter. There's nothing solid. This mouse looks solid. But no physicist has ever in the history of science ever discovered anything solid. So what they do is they say, well, what is this mouse then? Well, if you burrow into the mouse, you get empty space and molecules. You burrow into that, you get empty space and atoms. You burrow into that, you get empty space and subatomic particles. And you burrow into that, and down the rabbit hole it goes. So they've never actually found a solid anything. All they have is energy, frequency, waves. And E equals mc squared, energy equals mass. So what we're basically dealing with is an energy-based universe that comes into alignment, like tuning a television set or a radio to a frequency, and we see it and we hear it, and it seems like we're there. But the reality is we're not there. And so what remote viewers do is they learn how to adjust the tuner in their brain to tune into other times, other places, other locations, all across time and space. That's what they do. And that's why remote viewing works. It's a tuning procedure that the remote viewers, like artists, become really good at.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't touch upon what we learned from Bruce Lipton, Thomas Verney about the broadcast, how our brains are really a television set tuning into a broadcast. So I like this metaphor of adjusting the tuner. In my own personal experience, I'm starting to believe that personally. But of course, I've been open to the idea anyway. Another thing, and this is a question to you, it's frustrating for me to still read and to understand that academia pushes back against this kind of idea. Even though folks like Albert Einstein admitted that that this is a possibility. Well, you said to me you are not to switch subjects because I'd like to stay on the same subject, but just to illustrate the point, you said that you're the only professor on planet Earth that actually talks about extraterrestrials.
Yeah, and remote viewing, the combination of both.
And remote viewing.
And what we found is in our explorations is that telepathy and remote perception is a standard thing among extraterrestrials. It's like to them, it's as common as the way we breathe. So you can then say, well, why is it so weird, wonky for us, and why do we resist it? Well, there's a big story behind why we resist it, but the academia is the last group that will surrender, because I mean, look what happened to Hugh Everett. I mean, throughout his whole lifetime, they resisted and resisted. And even now, there's only 25% of mainstream physicists that think he was right, although it's clearly where the trend is going.
Yeah.
Even despite that, despite overwhelming evidence that the quantum mechanical interpretation that was developed, called the Copenhagen interpretation, is just crazy. There's no logical basis for it, that you can have a collapse of the wave function and only one reality will pop out. That was just posited. It was just stated. Someone just said, well, that's what happens. No one ever came up with a reason for why that should happen. And Hugh Everett said it doesn't happen. His word for it was a monstrous interpretation. But if you have any premonition, like you feel something's going to happen and then it happens, where did that come from? If even one premonition for even one person on the entire planet Earth is correct, then the entire classical understanding of physics is incorrect, because you're transferring information across time and space. So if anyone in your audience, anyone anywhere, has ever felt something and it turned out to be true, or remote viewed or perceived something, if even one remote viewing experience is correct, then it violates the entire paradigm of classical mainstream physics. And the only way, I mean, you can't have an exception for one person. You can't say that all of physics is mainstream and it's all okay, but this one person had an exception. You can't do that. If even one experience turned out to be correct, then it's all crazy. And it's the same thing with the extraterrestrials. You can say, well, show me that the extraterrestrials exist. Have one land in my backyard. Well, all you can say is if of all the literally hundreds of thousands of extraterrestrial sightings that have been, and the U.S. military, especially the U.S. Navy, has been very upfront with this. But if even one is correct, if even one UFO thing is correct, one out of the hundreds of thousands, then the whole idea that mainstream science has, that we don't think there's any extraterrestrials out there, that's crazy. Look at it this way. Until 1995, now Luciano, I'm assuming you were born before 1995. This was in your lifetime.
21 years old, 1995, okay. Yes.
So before 1995, virtually 100% of the mainstream astronomical community said there's no chance of there being planets around other stars. It's just the configuration, the difficulty of condensing solid planets out of a primordial solar nebula is just so unusual that the fact that the idea that it could happen, that you can get a planet around a star, is very rare, if ever, even in our entire galaxy and universe. I swear, if you go back, that's what they were saying. But they all deny that then. Now they like to phrase it like, we didn't know, but we sort of suspected. The reality was they argued on mainstream media. It doesn't exist. There's no planets. Now, we look at that as crazy today because in 1995, they discovered first evidence of a planet around another star. Now we discover 2 or 3 a week. I mean, it's just a very common type of thing. And the same thing, you have to say,
exoplanets. We call them exoplanets.
Yeah, exoplanets. Right? And you have to say the same thing about why they were crazy. It was a belief system. It was a religious belief system, because They didn't want to acknowledge the idea that there could be so many planets. But the only scientific answer that they could have given is the mean. The mean, if you have a sample, even a sample of one, that's the only scientific legitimate answer. And they had a sample of one, which is our solar system. And that solar system had 9 major planets, an asteroid belt, meteors all over the place, comets galore, all types of junk up there. And they were saying there's no possibility of another planet around a solar system. Do you realize how crazy that is? And so now they acknowledge that there's planets that are ubiquitous. They're common around all star systems or every place. All right. So now they've gone to that. But they resisted until 1995 because they didn't want to go the next step. If there are planets, there has to be life, and we're in the exact same situation that we were back then, because they said they have a sample. You have to. The only thing you can do is if you have to look at the only scientific response is the mean, and we have at least one planet. We now know that Mars was heavily populated with biological life, and then there was another planet, which is now the asteroid belt, which was fully populated with life as well. But so even if you don't go to the point of there being 3 planets in the solar system that had life on it, and you say you just have Earth, okay, so let's say you just have Earth. On Earth, there are zillions, billions upon billions of life forms on all types of environments, hostile life forms in the desert, in the ice, in the bottom of Antarctica. There's every possible type of life. And how could you possibly then say, with that mean, which is in the billions and zillions of life forms, there's no other life in the universe? And so, and this whole charade that they go through of searching for radio signals for some distant star system, it's just, the whole thing is just crazy. And so, and there's reasons behind why they're doing that, but it's to prevent the real question, which is, what are we going to do about the fact that there's extraterrestrials and that they're not just out there, they're already here? And so then that opens up a whole new bag of stuff that people have to look into. So among the psi community, the people who study remote viewing and psychic phenomena, they're split right now. There's people that like to keep it just in terms of scientific experiments, trying to demonstrate through statistical probability stuff, through countless trials, that psi functioning works. And Dean Radin is in that camp. He's the type that he goes through lots of trials. He likes to try to get his articles published in mainstream physics journals, and he's been quite surprisingly successful at getting his stuff published. And so this is not a criticism of Dean Radin at all. I think he's great, but he likes to focus on the idea of demonstrating that psi functioning exists, that remote viewing is something that can work. But we have gone way past that. We have said, no, if you just focus on that, you're keeping everybody in a box. We found out that the entire universe out there uses psi functioning just the way you and I are talking. This is how they communicate. This is how the extraterrestrial species don't rely on stuff coming out of the mouth to make sounds. They communicate telepathically normally. For us, it's an unusual experience, but for them, that's normal. Remote perception, what we call remote viewing, that's normal for them. But we also found that they have invested a huge amount in the technology of these things, though they have ramped up telepathic communication and ramped up remote viewing, remote perception, based on technological enhancements as well. So they have a whole science about this whole thing. And
so when you say about communication, not opening mouths and so forth, we do that in dreams. So in dreaming, we don't open our mouths like we do here. We don't use our 5 senses and to understand and communicate with us. So we do have an understanding through dreams. I wanted to add that. Let's go then to extraterrestrials. What have you found through your remote viewing exercises and exploration? What exactly have you found? Who have you communicated with?
Well,
how do those happen, those communications?
We have gone back a number of decades now.
Yeah.
And there's been quite a bit of controversy along the way.
Sure.
Mainstream science used to laugh at us. Now they are silent. It's like the movie Waiting to Exhale. They're just holding their breath and saying, where is this going? But within this community that studies psychic phenomena, psi phenomena, things like that, they're split. There's one group that says, let's just keep everything in terms of just trying to demonstrate the psi function exists, hoping that mainstream science will eventually just look at them and say, this is great, you're wonderful. And there's people like us who have said, to heck with mainstream science, let's just figure out where this goes. And what we did was we originally we basically ran into, once we started using remote viewing for exploration purposes, we ran into extraterrestrial stuff all over the place, whether we wanted to or not. And these are people doing sessions totally blind, not knowing anything about anything, and they were just coming up with stuff. So we initially wanted to know, well, do extraterrestrials exist? And we thought that if we used remote viewing just to help demonstrate that extraterrestrials exist, that would be the end of the story. And we could say, yes, kudos, this is wonderful, great. But then we found out that the story was way more complicated. Not only do they exist, but they have been around for a long time, and that they're very actively have been involved in the human population on Earth. And then all types of questions came up when we realized that they could see us, they could interact with us, they could communicate with us when we're remote viewing. And then the questions came up, well, why can't we do that easily among ourselves? So the long story is, we've finally discovered after a great many years that the extraterrestrials are divided. It's a very violent galaxy. There is a huge amount of controversy about how to deal with Earth and this population, and that there's one group of extraterrestrials that are extremely repressive. To call them Nazis would be a nice compliment to them, because that's how bad they are. And then there's another group of extraterrestrials that are ferocious defenders of what we call free will, that are waiting to sort of humanity to align themselves. They won't do anything to help humanity unless humanity free will makes the decision to align itself. The bad extraterrestrials, the ones that are really, really badly oppressive, they're the ones that are involved in containing the information about remote viewing, about extraterrestrial life, and they're the ones that are responsible for all the fear you get in academia. They're the ones that are responsible for manipulating politicians through every means that you can possibly imagine: bribery, intimidation, fear, and also mental manipulation to stop disclosure from happening. There are some people in the U.S. military, especially in the Navy, that are trying ferociously to stop this, to fix this, to push disclosure, but they can't make the ultimate decisions. The presidents have to ultimately make the decisions. So what's happening now is that a crisis is developing right now, as we have been witnessing and figuring this out, where a planetary crisis is being engineered by the bad extraterrestrials to force the human leadership to sign agreements. They've done this before, but now they're going after the whole ball of wax, to sign agreements to align themselves with the bad extraterrestrials, so that the good extraterrestrials, which really ferociously defend free will say, well, if that's what you decide to do, that's what you decide to do, then they're out of there. The good extraterrestrials will simply leave, and then we're stuck just with the bad extraterrestrials. And if you want to know what it will be, that was what the last time the bad extraterrestrials did whatever they wanted on Earth without any interference from the good extraterrestrials was when the pyramids were being built with the slave population. That's what happened. They've been held in check ever since then, and it's taken us thousands of years to slowly recover. And we're still trying to recover to the point of even acknowledging that extraterrestrials exist. But as soon as you acknowledge any of that stuff, the entire house of cards is going to collapse. It'll be hugely tumultuous. And the bad extraterrestrials want to say, you don't want that. We can fix this. So crises are being developed around the planet that will trying to force human leadership to say, we can't handle this anymore. We'll sign wherever you want. And that would give them permission to work with that'll align themselves formally with the bad extraterrestrials. Then the good extraterrestrials will go. That's the long and the short of what this is, what this is all about, and why there's so much problems with disclosure, both about remote viewing and extraterrestrial life. And fiddling with trying to prove the psi function exists is exactly what the bad extraterrestrials want you to do. They want you to play around with silly questions of whether it exists, despite the overwhelming evidence that the thing works and the military is using it, wants to use it, has used it for decades. Despite all of that, the bad extraterrestrials say, yeah, just play around in your sandbox, do your experiments, do how many trials have you done? 10 or 20,000? Okay, do another 100,000 trials, see if you can prove it works. While the bad extraterrestrials are in fact using all of this stuff in their normal way of doing things.
So when you say bad, are these, so two questions. One, can they be felt and seen by our senses?
Yes.
Okay.
But they hide, and they have arrangements with the U.S. government that goes back quite a few decades to operate in secret, hidden, in physical locations underground, and it's a huge priority for them to remain hidden. That's why we don't end up seeing them walk around. If the whole thing of the extraterrestrials comes out as real, then everything that they've been doing, the whole house of cards is going to destroy all of they cannot function if people know that they're really there. So the idea of staying hidden is a big deal for them. Mm-hmm. That's a huge deal for them. And the good extraterrestrials want that all to end.
So I ask a question here. I ask a question of people when I have these kinds of conversations about influence and power. If you really wield the greatest type of power, would you want to be in everybody's face, or do you want nobody to know?
The greatest type of power is when nobody knows. If they don't even know that you're there, that you can do anything you want with them.
Sure.
Look, Luciano, this is the bottom line. Not only do we have to have disclosure, but we have to have a major ramping up of our military capabilities. The military knows this completely. It's a political problem, and the politicians are being manipulated. The military knows this already. Part of the military says, okay, let's keep working with the bad extraterrestrials because they're helping us out tech-wise, understanding some of reverse engineering of these crash ships that they've got. All right, so they have that. The other side of the military says, what, are you serious? You're working with the wrong people. The level of help that they're giving is not enough to be able to compete with those bad extraterrestrials. I should have actually turned my phone off. It's a spam phone call as well. I mean, the fact that let me tell you a way that any politician could win the next presidential election. I'll give you the secret. All they have to do is promise to get rid of all spam phone calls. Okay. So, but getting back to what we were getting, the spammers are destroying our telecommunication system. If they just say they'll throw the spammers in jail, I tell you they'll win a landslide.
Okay. So, sorry. Speaking of jail, so it sounds like we're living in a Truman Show. And you said to me in another conversation that we are living in a prison. So if we are living in a prison as prisoners, and as prisoners who are aware, what do we do? What can we do to get out of the prison?
There's only one thing you can do. We do not have the military capability to combat the bad extraterrestrials. The good extraterrestrials are no threat whatsoever. But the bad extraterrestrials, if we make an alliance with formal agreements being signed with the bad extraterrestrials, the good extraterrestrials will go. And do you think the bad extraterrestrials are going to even blink before they take whatever they gave? They can take away. They would take away all of they would then be free totally to manipulate human leaders, to do whatever they want, total mental manipulation. And they'd also be free to take away all the tech. We would literally be back at the old, slave days of the pyramid building. If you want to deal with the bad extraterrestrials, you're talking about really wanting to work with the rock, because that's where you're going to end up, because that's really where they want to keep everybody. So
why? For what reason?
Because they only want to capture the people. The real wealth in the galaxy we discovered is with the people itself. We call ourselves Isbis, not souls or spirits. Isbis, people who an Isbi is someone who is simply for the purpose of being, and these physical bodies are just shells that we wear. And so the Isbis are what they want to capture, because they can't do anything in the universe without an ISB population to populate it. And look at any authoritarian society. Look at the Soviet Union. They didn't allow their people to get information from the outside, and they didn't allow their people to leave.
Sure.
Look at the information blocks that Russia has right now. The information blocks that China have right now. The blocking of the internet. They control the information, and when worse comes to worse, they don't even let people out of the society. People are not even able to leave Cuba easily. So the point is, and Burma, for example, Myanmar, it's the same type of thing. Authoritarian regimes try to control their population because they have no power without that. And it's the exact same with the bad extraterrestrials. And they use those beings, those ISBs, for stuff that they do as they expand through the galaxy. Without those and if they didn't control those populations, they would leave. Everybody would leave. They have to control them, and they have to contain them. So they don't want us to be flying around with high technology and stuff like that. But they're not worried about that because they can take that all away as long as the good extraterrestrials get out of there. So basically what we have to do is we not only have to get disclosure, but we have to have a huge ramp up in our military capabilities. And I'm not just talking about technical military capabilities. I'm talking about psi military capabilities, mental capabilities. The very fact that we can remote view is just the tip of the iceberg. When the bad extraterrestrials do battle, they do battle on the level of mental functioning before they even get engaged in the ships. They don't want to risk engagement with the ships and lose their stuff if they can control the enemy mentally. So we have to ramp up our mental military capabilities hugely and learn how to enhance them technologically. And all sorts of questions are going to arise. You don't want the military then to turn those capabilities back on its own population and manipulate our own leadership. But that's something we can deal with. The point is we can't. This is it, Luciano. We have discovered in our stuff, in our explorations, that there are no free societies in the entire galaxy that are not well defended. There is no such thing as a society out there that's a perfect paradise that just lives out there and no one bothers them. No, it doesn't exist. They have free societies, but they must be defended. And so that's what that's our situation is. So you asked me, what can we do? There's only one thing we can do. Disclosure will lead to a complete collapse of the entire bad ET agenda. At that point, humanity would then demand an alignment with the good ETs. The good ETs have the resources. They would flood in here in a blink of an eye, and the bad ETs would go. That's the only thing, with allies.
So you're asking for a huge shift in beliefs.
A huge shift. And it's either that, there's going to be a huge shift no matter what. If the bad ETs are successful in their plan to get an alignment with human authorities, then there's going to be a huge shift. The good ETs will go, and we're back as slaves in the pyramid building days, and you and I are working with a rock. That's a huge shift. Versus disclosure, a demand among the populace for an alignment with the good ETs, and then the military capabilities are all set up with the good ETs to force the bad ETs to go. We have discovered that the bad ETs retreat in the face of superior military capabilities. They don't fight it out to the death. So with a huge influx of good ETs, the bad ETs would go. But we're not survivable without allies. We can't do it on our own.
I mean, it sounds, with your experience here, and you're obviously impassioned about what you've discovered and what you're discovering.
This has been years and years and years in the works. And in the beginning, we were doing very modest stuff. We were trying to prove that remote viewing works. They were in the way we said, "Oh, this is interesting. We discovered extraterrestrials are out there for real."
You're talking over the last 30 years or so, right?
Yeah. And initially, we were saying all we have to do is show that extraterrestrials are real, and we can watch them with remote viewing. That was all we thought we needed to do. We had no idea this whole thing was, but then we've done zillions of projects, one after the next, where we went after every single mystery that occurred in the world, going back, thousands of years. And the ETs are involved with all of that stuff. And so there's manipulation going back and forth all over the place. And the good ETs are not going to stop it unless we make a decision.
What have you found out? What are our origins? How were we created? Who created us? How were we created? Did you find
the entire evolution works. Evolution is a real thing. I'm not arguing against Darwin, but in the midst of all of that, it takes millions of years for things to change on an evolutionary basis.
Mhm.
This whole idea that we are who we are because of random selection is just stupid. Because what basically mainstream archaeology science says is that we were basically apes or close to apes till say 100,000 years ago. And then we were hunter gatherers until a few thousand years ago. And then basically we were able to build big pyramids out of nothing, just being hunter gatherers. And we popped basically out of apes in sort of a blink of an eye in terms of evolutionary time. And that's crazy. It just can't happen. You just don't. It takes millions of years. Evolution works, but to get a human out of an ape, you're talking millions and millions and millions and millions of years. And so I've heard people say, they argue this to ever that, well, where's the evidence? In archaeology, there is actually tons of evidence of past prior civilizations that were extremely advanced on Earth, and it's buried. If you talk to for graduate archaeology students and say, look, what about this evidence and that evidence? They'll say, oh, we're not allowed to talk about that. This is true. If you actually go on one of their digs and talk to the graduate students, they'll tell you, if we talk about that, we'll never get a job. They know that the stuff is there. They know that the tech has been discovered. They know that things have been discovered. They know that the archaeological story that people are told is wrong, but they're not allowed to talk about that. And there was Michael Cremo wrote a huge, actually a really thick book on forbidden archaeology. That's the title of it, where and it was incredibly well sourced in terms of citations and so on of archaeological findings that were forbidden. You just couldn't. They totally don't fit into the archaeological story that people are told. But it's real, and you cannot say a non-mainstream argument. The only thing you can do in mainstream archaeology, anthropology, is fiddle with the paradigm that they've already established, the story that they've already established. You can modify it a little here and a little there, but you can't say that humanity is a genetically engineered species. And you can't even say that there are extraterrestrials. That's why I'm the only professor, and I don't talk about remote viewing or extraterrestrial life at the university, but there is not a single professor in the entire world that exists out there that does this, that does what I do. Even though I do what I do out with the remote viewing and extraterrestrial life outside of the university, there is no other professor that does that. Now, let me ask you, Luciano, is that like even possible? You should be asking yourself, how could that possibly be? Well, it's the same thing as when 1995, before then, you couldn't find a single astronomer that would tell you there's planets out there, let alone life.
I can tell you that I've met many a professor, many a scientist, especially since we started this podcast, who have told me off recording that they have other colleagues who have approached them, thanking them for their work, but not being public about thanking them for their work.
Exactly.
I suspect. Do you? I shouldn't say I suspect. Do you get the same?
Yeah, they email me. They congratulate me for my bravery. They say it's so interesting and stuff, but don't mention my name. They actually say things like, make sure you don't have any. They're paranoid about this stuff. They're terrified about this stuff. They think of it as career threatening to even whisper even thoughts about any of this stuff.
Well, one of the people that I've met over the last couple of years, again, 2.5 years since we started the podcast, he's probably got the biggest cojones that I have met so far, in 3D in 3D language, so to speak. His name is Luis Zuniga, and you talked about authoritarianism in Cuba. He was a political prisoner. He's now 75. He was a political prisoner. All he needed to say when he was 22 years old in order to graduate from university is that he was a communist. That's all he needed to say. He refused to say it and was jailed. 19 years in jail. What he went through and what he saw is, for me, there's no way I could believe it. But he broke out of there twice. So for him, he knew he was in the Truman Show. He knew he was in a Truman Show, and he broke out of there twice. The second time, he decided to go back and rescue his friends. And so he ended up staying another 9 years in jail. He went back to rescue others. But he didn't have to do that, but he did. And in my opinion, that's somebody who believes that there's something beyond himself that's important. And so this is why I come back and ask you this question. You mentioned ISBE, that we are shells. And in a sense, to use that example with Luis, he understood that people are just shells to the authoritarian regime. Wouldn't it be really powerful? Excuse the naivete of this question, because I don't even know how it's going to come out. Wouldn't it be really powerful if we all just started to understand that we are more than just our bodies, and that our will and our feelings and our sense that we are more is actually real, and that we try and discover it? Wouldn't that be an answer?
Well, you've answered your own question, and the reality is you should be asking, what's stopping that from happening? Because everyone does have these experiences. What's stopping mainstream science from acknowledging that these things are real? What stopped mainstream science from before 1995 by drawing the obvious conclusion that there have to be planets everywhere? The one sample that they had of one solar system had planets all over the place. How could they possibly say there'd be no planets anywhere else? And so with life, how can they possibly be struggling with the idea of, could there be life in the universe when we have a planet that's got so many life forms on them, we can't even count them? Mm-hmm. So the reality is that you should be asking, what's stopping that from happening? What's stopping this blockage? I've been in situations where military people just look down at their desk and just shake their head when you sort of ask, like, what's wrong with academia? What's wrong with the people? But there is a reason. The reason is that there's a very highly organized and extremely well thought out level of control to control the information, and that it is an extraterrestrial operation. That is what is going on. That is what is, and it's very highly organized. It's had millions of years to finesse it, to get it to go right, to understand how to do it. It's not just a matter of putting out propaganda. The level of stuff that needs to be done in order to control a population, and a population will break free if the information is available to them. So it's the highest priority to control the information that's available to them. And that is the key. And then you can also say, well, then why don't we have the same telepathic and mental capabilities that the ETs have, the good and the bad ones? That's part of the genetic engineering that's been brought into the entire system. The whole genetic stuff is sort of geared up to dumb that down. And then there's an information control process and it's done on so many levels, from mental manipulation to fear, intimidation, open bribery, to get people to not acknowledge anything like that. If you look at the mainstream media, they still have the giggle factor with regard to anything dealing with UFOs, anything dealing with extraterrestrial life, anything dealing with functioning psychic stuff. You don't see it on mainstream news. You have to ask, well, why is that? It's extremely well controlled. And these beings who are doing the control have had millions of years to perfect this process, because they know they will lose the population if the information is not controlled. So that is their highest priority. Disclosure is the only way to break this whole thing down.
Well, so we learned this from two prior guests as well. Self-doubt and fear through Avi Loeb, who you obviously know, who's an astronomer, and has been very public about wanting to understand whether it's alien civilization that is part of Oumuamua. But then Leslie Kean, who actually did this, who broke the door open for the public discussion in the United States 5 years ago. And now the government is accounting for that by being public about having an outside agency, or an inside agency, I mean, who even knows, but an agency that reports on these phenomena. So it has broken out, but I agree with you about the giggle factor, because it reminds me about how uncomfortable individuals feel, because it's a human thing. So maybe this is something that was hardwired into us for this. Who knows? How uncomfortable human beings feel when they feel like they are the only one doing something, the only one saying something. And that the giggle factor, just like in playground at recess, is a really powerful bully tool.
Yeah,
And
it really is.
it's unfortunate because and maybe not, because we're also using this platform, this podcast, to reach out to people like you who don't give a shit about the giggles, who want to go after what they want to go after the information. So we want to explore the information that these folks like yourself are exploring, so that we can make up our own minds as well. Like we don't want people shouldn't be relying on giggles in order to inform them, because that is the blockage.
Yeah, but don't blame the people. They're in a system. They're in a sense prisoners. And people like Leslie Kean and Avi Loeb, I don't know them personally,
Yeah.
but I know of them and I know their work, and they're very brave.
Yes.
Now Avi Loeb, he was head of his department of astronomy. He's like at Harvard, so he's like really super big. He put a lot out. He put a lot of risk in it when he started to publish his series about Oumuamua.
Mhm.
And that was a very courageous thing for him to do, because he knew he was going to be up against an astronomical community
Mhm.
that is extremely well controlled. And that's the same community that's the exact same community that was denying that there's planets around any solar system, any star in the entire universe, not just galaxy, until 1995. So you can imagine how conservative that group is. Then you have to say, well, they're smart people. They have PhDs. They're not stupid. They're smart. They're really, really, really smart.
Yeah.
Why is it that they are so unwilling to put two and two together? Why is Avi Loeb the exception rather than the rule? That's the real question. And in terms of journalists, why is Leslie Kean the exception rather than the rule? That's what you have to ask. And then you have to also ask, even though you did have Leslie Kean and Avi Loeb make those statements, what's happened? Why did they not change the world? Why is it that they just were voices shouting in the dark? You have to ask then, what is the level of control in the society? Why is it happening such that even people like that can't break through? It's a serious question, and we have, through our own remote viewing studies, finally figured that out. It took us almost 30 years to figure it out, but now we do know exactly what's going on. And that's the story of what that is something that is a mainstream story within farsightprime.com. We actually do have disclosure with our streaming service. You actually do have disclosure, and we're not interfered with. We are allowed to keep publishing our stuff. Now, normally, when you get UFO groups, anything that's sort of edgy, they get broken up. They get highly controlled or disturbed or broken up. The intelligence community's job for many years has been to make sure it doesn't go mainstream, that this stuff doesn't break out.
You were shadow banned.
Well, already, we have. There's been attempts. We've been shadow banned on Google as well as YouTube. For example, we are the largest remote viewing venue anywhere by far, not even anything close. But if you search for remote viewing on Google, that you won't find us, as if we don't exist on the planet. Same thing with YouTube. So, and that didn't used to happen. That started in June of 2021.
Yeah.
Until June of 21, if you search for remote viewing, we're always near the top. But then suddenly someone made a decision and so on. Yeah, and then you have to ask, well, where is this struggle going on? And so the military is very highly divided. We are alive because part of the military has made the decision to keep us alive, to keep us. In a sense, my thought is that they're looking at farsightprime.com. They're looking at us because they're looking at us and our community to see what would happen if disclosure went large scale. So they're letting total disclosure happen within farsightprime.com and then watching the audience. They're watching us like a petri dish. But it's gotten to the point where we now know enough because we've been allowed to function. We now know enough where this game is going, and now we can state without any ambiguity that it's in the absolute best interest of every single person on the planet, including every single military and political person, to not sign those agreements with the bad extraterrestrials and to have disclosure. Because if there is no disclosure, the bad extraterrestrials will win, the good ETs will go away, and everybody's a slave again, and we're literally back working with rock. That's not a joke. All the tech would be ripped out. All of the good stuff that we have. The only reason we've been able to develop technologically so fast and so nicely is because of protection. The good ETs are holding the bad ETs back. You take that away, the bad ETs aren't going to mess with us like this. And they make all types of promises. They lie through their teeth. You can't believe a single thing that the bad ETs say. So the only issue is disclosure, because disclosure is you're not talking weapons, you're not talking atomic weaponry, you're not talking about gaining the technology to beat them. You can't do that. The only thing you can do is have disclosure, because that would force sort of a planetary civilization to demand an alignment with the good ETs. The good ETs are allies, and they are the only ones that have the physical capability to get the bad ETs to go. So disclosure. So we're not asking for a lot. We're not asking for a lot. The only thing we're saying is say the truth. That's all we're saying. We're not demanding anything other than let the information out and let everything else take care of itself. That's all we're saying. Is that too much? And now what Avi Loeb and Leslie Kean have done, they've done their part, but it's a drop in the bucket. Despite the huge reputation of Avi Loeb, it's still one drop in a very large bucket. It's not having the effect of changing the planet. The only thing that will have an effect is open disclosure, and then the whole house of cards will come down.
When USB passes away, where does the essence that is Courtney Brown, where does it exist? Where does it go? Where do you want to go?
That's a question that all the other extraterrestrials will simply laugh at, because the very fact that you should ask where you should go, you are you. You don't go anyplace. There's no essence that evaporates and goes into a cosmic voids. What happens is the body drops off, and there you are standing. Now you can't see you. Other people can't see you anymore because you're sort of out of phase, but you actually look pretty similar to what you did when you were physical. But this is the other part of the thing. In order for when the former Soviet Union existed, a huge effort was made to contain the population, to not let people leave. Death used to be a means of escape. You die, your physical death is gone, and then you're still the same. You're the same person, but you're not locked into the physical body anymore. You could go. So what the authoritarian, totalitarian ISB populations, societies did is they invested millions of years to figure out you cannot, first of all, you cannot kill an ISB. You cannot kill a person. So the whole religious idea that if you pray hard enough, you can be granted eternal life. That's part of the entire control system, because you can't kill somebody in the first place. No one can grant you eternal life because that's permanent. The only thing that you can do is you can capture an ISB. You can't kill an ISB. You can't kill yourself. You can't kill me, but you can capture people. And what you do is when you die, there are traps that are set up all over the planet. And these traps are actually all throughout large sectors of the galaxy that were set up by the authoritarian, totalitarian forces that had control over those sections to control the populations, to stop people from leaving and going to the free areas. They set up these traps. We call them death traps. But they start with seeing the light. You die, you come out, you see the light. It's like a moth. It emits a frequency that is highly attractive to the ISB, who you are. And you get sucked into this thing, and it's like a fly trap. It's sticky. the more you resist, the more it sticks and the more you get put in. And then it sucks you into a spot within it where there's an electroshock treatment. And it's extremely high voltage, more than anything that you get with like a lightning bolt or anything like that. And it rattles you. It cannot kill you, but it rattles you, and you lose your memory of who you are. And that's what that's where the mental functioning of psi functioning, telepathy, remote viewing, that sort of gets jarred at that point. And then it's all automated. So it's not like there's people out there doing this. It's all like computer automated. Then memories get put into you to give you thoughts. And very often with people who have near-death experiences, those memories are things like there was a council of elders and we all decided you needed to go back to work out these final problems that you needed in order to resolve these conflicts. And you have the choice of whether to stay or to go back, and they make you feel a little guilty if you don't go back, and you make the decision, go back. It's all part of the process to keep the population recycling so they don't leave. Otherwise, as soon as you die, you'd leave this place. And all authoritarian regimes do that. Ask anybody that's in Myanmar right now, formerly Burma, if they can leave. You think they can leave? The former Soviet Union, people couldn't. How do you think Mikhail Baryshnikov came to be the great ballet dancer that he was in the world? He had to escape. There was the ballet troupe from the Soviet Union was making a trip to one of the free countries, and on the way to the airport back, on the way to the plane to get back on the plane to go back to the Soviet Union, he ran out of the line and asked for asylum. That's how Mikhail Baryshnikov became someone that danced in the free world. He lives in Paris now. That's how Nuria did the same exact thing. Those societies try to control their populations at all costs and keep them under lock and key. And that's what happens when you die. And the key is you have to be able to escape that process. That process is extremely difficult to escape. So what we need is with disclosure. And with disclosure, you have a hugely intelligent, don't minimize this at all, a hugely creative and intelligent population on this planet. And if those people, those scientists, then focus their attention on dismantling the so-called traps, they could be taken apart. But they're extremely difficult to take apart. They're even extremely difficult to find. You're talking millions of years of development to get these traps in place. Anyway, that's what we're sort of heading towards. And that's why disclosure is such a big deal. Everything shifts in another direction as soon as you have disclosure. Everything.
How will you leave that lineup?
I'm a scientist. I'm just going to keep on plowing through. And when we discover stuff, I'm going to tell people what we figured out. And as long as we're protected and able to keep publishing, we'll keep publishing.
Last question. What is greatness to you?
That's a good question. And I definitely don't have the answer to that. If I ever knew it, that would be the ultimate. And I don't want to ever have an ultimate. You see, there is no end to anything. There is no getting it done. There is no finishing anything. So, because time is eternal and no Isby dies, so there's no finishing, no wrapping up of anything. So if I knew what greatness was, I'd know the end of the story, and there is no end of the story. So if you were to ask me what is greatness, I'd say it's enjoying yourself while you're going through the process. That's as best I can come up with.
Courtney, I appreciate your passion about what work you've been doing. There's certainly a lot to think about. Let's stay in touch. Maybe we can have, if you're open to it, maybe we can have a part 2 down the road as we continue to explore on this program too.
Sure. Luciano, it's been my pleasure. I've enjoyed your company here with this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Courtney.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today, there's more to come. Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and learn about our live events at inspirenorth.com. You'll also find links to our social media right on our website, so be sure to give us a like and follow. Until next time, stay inspired.